when I was asked to do this, what Knut asked me to do was sort of talk about the election, talk about the results and what it means. He gave me quite a breadth and flexibility to do whatever I wanted. So at this point, I'm not entirely sure where I'm gonna go with it, because there's so much to talk about, but I'm hoping that it's interesting and insightful. So I'm not gonna spend too much time on the actual election results. Can you all see this? No, okay, I will try and move on quickly. These are the 2017 results compared to the 2013 results. Now, it is true, not much changed. And as you all know, when there's not a lot of major issues or contentious issues or a strong mayoral race, voter turnout is usually low, and incumbents usually rule the day. Not much is different here. As you can see, voter turnout in this election was at 27%. So yeah, 27 out of 100 people voted. It seems dismal. That's pretty standard for municipal elections. It's actually higher than I expected for this election. In 2010, when there was major changeover on council, voter turnout was at 35%, and that was really high. So 27 for a pretty uneventful election is not too bad. And we'll talk a little bit about the issues as well. But in 2013, you'll notice turnout was just shy of 30%, so pretty close. What you will notice, there's a few anomalies here, and we're going to talk about them. The only incumbent not re-elected was Liz Iwascu. And honestly, I can't pinpoint exactly why she wasn't re-elected. What did she do that was so offensive that resulted in her not being re-elected? I can't really speak to that. But I can speak to why Mark Campbell and Belinda Crowson were. We'll talk about that in a minute. So if you look, not a lot's changed. Maybe the order a little bit, but not a lot. We'll go on to why. It's a pretty boring election, except for the following 4 points. Mark Campbell is the top vote getter. What? The top 8 are separated by how many votes? Liz is out, but Belinda is in, and the CAO retires? What? These are the 4 themes of this election, and they're significant, and we'll talk about why. So Mark Campbell being the top vote getter. Let's go back to this slide. He had 9,522 votes, okay? That's significant in and of itself. In the previous election, Joe Morrow as the top vote getter, and he's traditionally the top vote getter, was over 11,000. So really, it's significant that he's first place, but his actual vote count is not that much different from Joe's, or Jeff Carlson's, or Ryan Parker's, or even if you go down to Rob's. The distribution of votes is 2,200 from top to bottom. This is significant. Very, very significant. If we go back to this slide, previously there was 5,300 votes that separated top to bottom, or 51, almost 5,200. So this race was extremely close. But what's even more noticeable is if you look at Rob's vote count at 7,200, okay, and Liz being the one that got voted out was at 5,600. That's a 1,500 vote spread. She didn't even come close to getting elected. Nick Palladino was very, very close, and I see Nick is here right now, so only favorable things will be said. But 1,500 separating those that got elected and those that didn't. So what this says to me is that the voting public was very definitive in who they wanted on council. Very, very definitive. And the spread indicates that it doesn't really matter where you show up on this chart. It was equitable almost across the board because 2,200 votes is immaterial when you look at 21,000 voting. So that's the first thing that's really, really interesting. So, and with so many incumbents, what does that say about them? They're trusted. The voting population wanted to give them another chance. Again, it's strange that they didn't give Liz that chance, but everyone else got back in. So I think this is significant moving forward. Next. And of course, I guess it needs to be talked about. Name recognition. Very, very significant in the city of Lethbridge. When there are no major issues, name recognition goes a long way. And in this situation, actually, celebrity played a role as well. Joe Morrow has typically been the top vote getter. For Mark Campbell to come in as a newbie and take top seat is incredible. But it really does speak to how people vote. Now, whether it's good or bad, I'm not going to pass judgment. I prefer informed decision making, but at this point, name recognition really did play a huge role. And Mark will be the first one to admit that I'm going into this not knowing anything. I'm going to learn. I'm here to learn. But what's even more significant, and this is a little off topic, is that he wasn't an angry candidate. So in the past, when incumbents were unseated or newbies got on, it's usually the angry candidate, the anti-establishment, the anti-council. I'm going to do things differently. Your Wade Galloways and your Bob Babkeys. Bob Babke took, in the 2010 election, took second. He was second from Joe. He took 11,000 votes. But he was the anti-establishment. Mark Campbell was not the angry candidate, yet he took top seats. So this is significant as well. In fact, the only really truly angry candidate was Harold Perversoff, who's also here. So, and he showed well, but definitely not even coming close to being elected. So, but really there was that angst was there. It just didn't resonate during this campaign. All right. Liz is out, but Belinda is in. So now that we've talked, I'm going to keep going back to this so you can see it. But now that we've talked about name recognition, very few people knew who Belinda was. How did she come in? What is that, 6th? 7th? 6th. How did someone without name recognition, with a new person, come on and be 6th on the list? Anyone here know Belinda? If I called her the Galt Lady, would you agree with that? Isn't it interesting? So Belinda came in with very little name recognition, but throughout the process, her momentum built. In the forums, she was articulate, she was commonsensical, she wasn't angry, but she definitely had a vision. And people responded well to that. I was impressed, and from the beginning of this election, I would not have, when I predicted, I would not have put her as someone who was going to win. Halfway through, I thought, yep, if she can overcome not being a known entity, she might have a chance. For her to come in as 6th is absolutely incredible. She earned that. So where Mark Campbell had an advantage because he was known, Belinda had to fight to get there, and the voting public responded quite well. In fact, an incumbent didn't get reelected in an uneventful campaign, so Belinda really did. I don't know what it was that resonated. I think it was just her positivity, but she was critical of certain administrative processes that I think resonated with people. So Belinda's role on council, I think, will be a significant factor in this council moving forward, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. And then last but not least, the CAO retires. Now, some people don't think this is significant. I do. This is huge. The CAO, or the Chief Administrative Officer, is the administrative head of the city, corporation. I wasn't sure if I should call it corporation or not. So the CAO is the only employee of council, and as a former CAO myself, I understand the role very, very well. For me, the CAO retiring 5 days before an election is unheard of. It is mind-boggling. Now, I'm not judging why he chose to do it. It is personal. However, when you look at the situation, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And here's why. When a CAO leaves, it's very destabilizing, right? This man has 1,500 employees that report underneath him. When the leader of an organization leaves, it creates instability. Now, couple that with an election in 5 days where a whole new council could potentially come in. You now have a new council and you have no CAO. It creates so much angst and confusion and I think people question job security, where are we going? It creates all kinds of turmoil within the organization that it baffles me that the CAO would choose that moment in time to announce his resignation or his retirement. So I think it's significant as well. And we'll talk about why this is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it has potential for new opportunities that will lead this council and this city forward. It's a very positive spin on something that could be quite detrimental. So for me, those are the defining features of this election. There are a few other things, but for the most part, it was pretty boring. I wish it wasn't. There was a lot of issues that could have been talked about and weren't. So what were the issues again? I thought curbside recycling would be a huge one. I think it kind of went wah, 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 right? It was brought up at a number of forums. There were positions taken, but I think for the most part, the public was tired of hearing about it. Performing arts versus exhibition grounds, I definitely thought this would be a big one. There's polarized views on this, but I think it will be an issue moving forward. It was discussed, but it wasn't a major issue. Development. Economic and residential and commercial growth were definitely big themes. But what I heard was that where are we going with it? And there are some real concerns with innovation and creativity, or lack of, in this city. And that came out loud and clear throughout this election. What the city does with that, we don't know, and again, we'll talk about that. But it was definitely touched on and set a tone, not just about processes, but also where are we going? We keep talking about growth, but what does that look like? Nobody knows. The third bridge crossing came up just a few times, but again, I don't think people take it seriously. Should we have one, shouldn't we, is really not the question we should be asking. How would a third crossing benefit the city of Lethbridge? That's the question that should be asked, and it didn't necessarily get answered. So I do think it will be an issue moving forward. And administration inefficiencies. This is where the anger and some of the angst did come in. And it's worth noting, the city of Lethbridge was criticized for the number of employees that they have and the quality of service that is delivered. Again, these things are very, very complicated, but the message was clear. The public wants greater accountability, and I think that's where administration inefficiencies is their way of expressing that. Our taxes keep going up. You keep hiring more people. Why does the city have 1,500 employees? All these contracted labor as well. What are you doing with it? And I think that's a big one we're going to talk about. What's the return on investment? So people, the voter wasn't necessarily angry, but they want greater accountability. And that message came out in a lot of the forums. Non-issues that I thought would be issues. The ward system. That was talked about quite a bit prior to the election, and then during the election, it came up once or twice. Which I really was surprised about. And in fact, a number of incumbents who previously supported the ward system in the Lethbridge Accountability Survey actually said they no longer support the ward system. I thought that would come up. Why? Explain yourself. Why the change of opinion? And it didn't. So whether it's off the table, it's a non-issue, I don't know. I do feel that some of the councillors will make it an issue, but whether it actually gets any legs or not, I don't know. And then full-time counselors. This was strange that it didn't become a major election issue because the city of Lethbridge prior to this election did have a citizens' assembly to look at full-time counselors. And the recommendation was, of course, to not have full-time counselors for a number of reasons. But I thought this is a beautiful election issue that could, I think, spark all kinds of debate and discussion about the role of council, and it never came up. So I was really surprised about what was discussed and what wasn't. But again, without being overly judgmental, pretty boring campaign in all. Do you agree? Okay, good. I need that affirmation. But I think it's going to get exciting moving forward. So for me, that sort of sums up this election. But where are we going to go with this now? Okay. I'm going to start with the big one, a new sheriff in town. And I'm not referring to, and I'm referring to the city manager, not the mayor. I didn't talk a lot about the mayoral race because, again, it was not a surprise. So for me, it's status quo. However, the nature and the dynamic of his council did change, and I think that's significant. But right now, I want to talk just a little bit about the role of the CAO. So the city manager is a very important job. In fact, it's the most powerful position in the whole organization. Council comes in, they have 4 years. They counsel and make decisions, million-dollar decisions, true, twice a month. The CAO and administration does their job 7 days a week. So who has the most influence? Who has the most power over the vision of the organization? It really is the city manager. It's a very important role. And in the last 30 years, the CAO position has been hired internally. I'm not opposed to promotion internally. However, in this situation, I think council has a real opportunity here. They get to select a new CAO. Now, why this matters is A, because of the timing of the CAO's retirement, it changes the nature of governance for this council for the first year. Because it is destabilized and because they now have an interim, or will have an interim CAO, and then they will have to recruit a new CAO, and they will have to hire a new CAO, the next year is very different than if you had a stable city manager in place. Not a bad thing, it just changes the nature of governance. So while this council, 2 of them in particular, are learning their job, they also get to hire their only employee. It can be very overwhelming. And making a wrong choice under such scrutiny can be stressful. So the nature of how this council will function over the next year is significant. But having the majority as incumbents, there's that stability there. So it balances out. But what it also says is this council has a real opportunity to take their time and to hire the right person to steer this ship. And I really hope that they do. I hope that they take the time to look and to say, okay, who are we looking for to implement our vision? That's the big one. What's their vision? Keep that in the back of your mind, because before they can hire a CAO, they need to understand what their vision is and the direction they want to go in. I tried to find, because I do this, because I'm like this, tried to find all of the strategic plans, all of the planning documents, the sustainability plan, the municipal development plan, and I tried to see how all of these city strategies align, how they interact with each other. They don't. There's hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on planning documents that don't link to each other. This is a major concern for me. We as a city talk about growing to 100,000. Why? Is that a magic number? Growth for growth's sake is not a good strategy. What type of growth? In what areas? Do we want commercial development? Do we want residential development? There's a lot of fluffy terminology and buzzwords used in a lot of those documents, but there's no specifics. I feel that this council, if they're going to build a solid strategy and vision for where we're going, because I think the voting public wants that. We're ready for that. We want to know, what are you going to do with this great city we have that doesn't seem to be changing or evolving? And I believe the role of the CAO or the city manager is crucial to that success. So my challenge to council is to take your time to hire the right person. And I think when I assess the results of this election and how uneventful it is, it's quite positive. This city has done amazing things. It has a solid foundation. Okay? Through the economic downturn, with all the issues in Calgary, with the energy sector, we have weathered that storm well. We have this advantage. How are we going to capitalize on it? Agriculture has kept us afloat. What are we going to do with it? We're growing. What are we going to do with that? We are a stable economy. What are we going to do with that? Again, I believe council has a real opportunity to build off of a solid foundation that previous council and previous administrations worked very, very hard to build. But I believe the public is now ready for what's next. I'll use an example. When the crossings, the rec facility was announced and construction started on the west side, rather than people being really excited about it, it was, well, it's about time. How often have we heard that? Well, it's about time. It's about time. It seems that there's this perception that the city of Lethbridge is always behind. It's about time, it's about time. Well, we should have had that years ago. Curbside recycling, why is it so contentious? What large urban doesn't have curbside recycling? I think that there's now this idea that we need to have a vision and a direction for this city so that we can all get behind it and watch ourselves grow in a thoughtful, purposeful way. I was born and raised here. And you know what? I hate to say it, but the city doesn't look that much different than it did 25 years ago. I'm older than 25, but that's when I remember. So I think that that's where you kind of go, who are we? What is our identity? We need specifics, and I think that's where the city manager needs to have those competencies to say, I will help this council build a solid, strategic vision that matches our existing culture, where we, the people, want it to go. And I've got some ideas around that. So that's the first one. Now, what's next for this council? What can or should we expect? These are the big themes that came out of the election: economic development, social issues, and development in general. Okay? So almost every candidate talked about new business, new business, new business. We need new business. What kind of new business, right? Do we want industry? Do we want manufacturing? Do we want tech? Do we want entrepreneurs? Do we want small business? What kind of business? New business needs to be defined. What kind of economy do we want? And we need to be strategic in how we move that forward. I look at it and I say we have some really significant themes here, agriculture being one of them. So previous council attracted Cavendish, potatoes. How are we capitalizing on that? Right? There was a cost, definitely, to the taxpayer to attract a multi-billion-dollar business to this city. What's the return on investment? Are we doing research? What kind of jobs are going to be created? We don't know. We know that Cavendish is coming here. What's the value to us, the taxpayer? I don't know. I really think this needs to be explored, because that can have all kinds of economic spin-offs, right? Social issues, we'll get into that in a minute too, and development, commercial and residential. These are the specifics. So economic development is a buzzword. We need more economic development. Again, it needs to be specific. When you read all of the plans, I can't pinpoint exactly what that means. Even when we talk about downtown revitalization, which I think is an important issue, are we talking about mixed density, residential? Are we talking about small business? Are we talking about retail? Are we talking about incubators? What are we talking about? And one thing about downtown revitalization is you also have to address the social issues. That doesn't happen all the time. So decision-making can't happen in isolation. When you talk about a safe injection site, you also have to factor in your economic development strategy. It's just a reality. Has the city done that? When they decide where they're going to locate this, have they considered the economic impact that will have? If you have a strong economic development strategy, you will know exactly where it fits and why. And I think that that's where this council needs to go. Third bridge crossing, I think that factors into economic development as well. There's talk about this third bridge is going to cost $250 million, and you obviously can't do it without provincial funding. Well, what's again the return on investment for that? It's not a pipe dream if you have a solid strategy in place. The provincial government will strongly consider investing in that kind of infrastructure if it's attached to a larger strategy. The south side of the city, you see the growth, both residential and commercial. It's close to the airport. How does the airport factor into that? These are also regional partnerships. Do we know what that looks like? I've heard a lot of rhetoric, but I haven't seen a specific plan. But there's so much potential on the south side of the city that really a third bridge crossing is a secondary consideration when you see the bigger picture. When you don't have the bigger picture, don't ask for a third bridge crossing. But when you can sell the idea because there's true economic spin-offs as a result, the provincial government will strongly consider it. But until you do, they won't. I do think that there will be a decision between the performing arts and the exhibition grounds. I don't think you're going to get both. I think that was very clear. And when you think about how much capital has already been spent on infrastructure in the city over the last 4 years, I just don't think the city can afford to do both. However, again, and I'm just going to be a little bit critical here, this is why a strong vision and strategy matters. Years ago, the performing arts was the #1 priority, and suddenly CASA was built. Why? No explanation. Doesn't make sense to a lot of people. There might be logic behind it, but you have to say, how is it that we were told the performing arts would take precedent, and then out of the blue, another facility was built with very little explanation? Again, I think people need to know why these decisions are made and how they all come together. At this point, I don't believe there's going to be both. You will get your performing arts or your exhibition. Downtown revitalization, we've talked a little bit about that. And then I think greater collaboration with developers. But the city won't get out of private or out of public land development. This was a big criticism throughout this election, was that private developers are competing with the city. They're not going to get out of it, but instead I do believe that open, transparent conversations about how that relationship looks moving forward has to be had. Developers are some of our greatest innovators and creative thinkers. Outside of service delivery, wastewater, garbage, water, growth defines who we are as a community, what we look like, how much is commercial, how much is residential, and that conversation has to happen with our developers. And let them be creative. Let them come to the table with really good ideas about what our community could look like, and if that's aligned with a strategic vision, you're going to see beautiful things happen. And then my wish list. Just to quickly, I don't know how much time I have, but this is my final challenge to council. Sit down and talk about how we can capitalize on the really good economic environment we're currently in. It's not going to last forever. The taxpayer will only foot the bill for so long before they start asking, what's my return on investment? That came out through this election, and I think it's time for council to really be specific. And I call it an operationalized vision. Get rid of the fluff. Start looking at specifics. And this is my example. We have strong agriculture here. We have culinary arts. The college is doing amazing research in culinary arts and organoleptic, I can't even say the word, research on using the senses to determine quality of food. We have potatoes, we have sugar beets, we have corn, we have all kinds of peas. We have a strong agricultural region. Why are we not capitalizing on that? Why are we not using it to our advantage? Why are we not doing research and bringing together the community using the culinary arts?